Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Ifetayo Ojelade. I'm a licensed psychologist, and I am also the executive director at A Healing Paradigm, and we are based in Atlanta, Georgia. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with one of my colleagues, Dr. Kevin Cokley. Dr. Kevin Cokley is a professor of educational psychology and African Diaspora Studies. Did I get it right? At the University of Texas at Austin. He is also the director of the Institute of Urban Policy Research and Analysis. And today we are going to talk about Dr. Cokley's research. Specifically, I wanted him to come and talk about this concept of defending Black people in all the work that we do. There is this movement in this country to have us look as though we are not intellectual people and that we have this kind of sense of anti-intellectualism. So we're going to jump into that conversation, jump into Dr. Cokley's research. But before that, we're going to do a couple of things. So welcome, Dr. Cokley.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes. Okay, so you agreed to play my little game, right?
I'm scared, but yes.
I gotta no, you don't have to be scared. I took this from the Black librarians, so I'm gonna give them credit and shout out to the Black librarians. So I just kind of changed the name of it. So our game that we are playing this morning is Black Love. I am going to give you a category. Within that category, you will have to name 8 things within that category within 15 seconds. And you can do it. Breathe. You can do it. And here's a little caveat. No fillers. So no ums, us, so's.
I'm lost.
Oh, and there's Alethea. She said, welcome. Can you see her comments on the side now?
I do not, unfortunately.
So is it clicked on comments?
Yes, I do now. Yes, I was on. Yeah.
That's okay. Alethea. She's my office manager. So she jumped on already. So we're just warming up. Okay. So are you ready?
I hope so.
I have my trusty timer. So the category is Black psychologists. Within 15 seconds, you're going to name 8 Black psychologists. No ums, us, so's, any of that. Ready? Go.
Robert Williams, Asa Hilliard. No! I want to do over. God. Oh my God! I didn't even last 3 people before I said do over.
Okay, let me think of another category. Okay.
No, I want the same category. No, same category.
You want the same category? It's no fun if you already know because you got time to think.
Oh gosh.
All right, come on. We're gonna do it one more time just so we can get the names out there. Ready? Go.
Asa Hilliard, Wade Nobles, Naeem Akbar, Linda James Myers, Robert Williams, Cheryl Grills, Darryl Rowe.
Stop.
Did I get 8?
That's 15 seconds.
I didn't get 8?
Huh? Was that 8? That wasn't 7. You did 8?
Oh, I lost count. It was 7 or 8. I was about to say
We'll give it to you.
Oh my gosh.
Well, thank you for playing my little game.
Wow, I gotta work on that.
And admittedly, it's funny because when I'm telling the directions, I'm saying so and I'm doing all the fillers, and I'm telling you can't use fillers. Anyway, so let's just jump into this conversation. And I want to just start off at a little bit. I always tease of my folks that are educational psychologists because I'm like, well, what do y'all do? tell us just a little bit about educational psychology, just briefly. What does an educational psychologist do?
Well, so in point of fact, I'm actually, you probably know this, I'm actually trained as a counseling psychologist, right? So my PhD in counseling psychology, I work in the Department of Educational Psychology. And so certainly educational psychology as a discipline, even though I wasn't trained in it, but as I understand it, is a discipline that focuses on the psychological processes underlying learning, that sort of focus on, issues such as motivation, academic motivation, academic self-concept. You hear a lot of terms called like regulation. Like I don't do that sort of stuff. That's, I tend to focus more on issues related to identity and motivation as it relates to Black students.
Great. And yes, so you are educational psych, just like me. We actually graduated from the same program. You were the one black man that graduated the decade before.
Yes.
And I think that's a good combination of like having that training in educational psychology, counseling psychology, and then being in that field, because then you can look at the things that you were talking about and how it impacts just educational attainment. So as it relates to our people, and particularly Black children, talk a little bit about the research that you do.
So, and I really credit Baba Asa Hilliard for my interest. Hopefully your listeners are familiar with him, but for those who may not be, Baba Dr. Asa Hilliard was really a renowned educational psychologist and also an Egyptologist, one of the preeminent African-centered psychologists of our time. I had the good fortune of being exposed and learning from him, while he was still a professor at Georgia State University. In fact, one of the main reasons, probably the main reason why I chose to attend Georgia State University was because of him. I had been, I was familiar with his work. I had been reading him for such a long time. And I thought that if I could have the opportunity to sort of, drink from his fountain of wisdom, that would help me in my sort of professional goals. And so if you know anything about him, you know that he was an unapologetic defender of Black people and Black children in particular. And so I would go to his office, and this was sort of his thing. You go to his office and he would have this sort of like just piles and piles of research papers and books, and he'd always give you homework assignments, and he'd always say, you need to read this, you need to look at this, and but most importantly, he was always talking about just sort of the defense of our people, and that really sort of rubbed off on me. Like that was really the primary way that I sort of viewed my responsibility as a scholar of African descent, and I took that from Dr. Hilliard. And so what I've done during the course of my career has been to really sort of focus, particularly on the psychology of African American students. I've been interested in issues pertaining to their achievement, whether it's related to their motivation, to their academic self-concept. I've focused a lot on issues of identity. There's a lot of debate in the literature related to whether having a strong Black identity is linked to academic achievement. The literature is sort of all over the place. Maybe we'll get to that, in a bit. But those have, really been my interest. And what I've been clear about is that the ways in which Black students have been sort of portrayed and caricatured in the media is not, in fact, indicative of who they are as students, and is not indicative of the fact that as a people, we in fact do value education. And so what really I think got me going, or one of the things that really I think made me most passionate about this, was responding to a book that was written several years ago. I believe it was in 2000 by, interestingly enough, another African American professor who happened to be a professor of linguistics. His name was John McWhorter. And so he wrote this book called Losing the Race: Self-Sabotage in Black America. And when he wrote it, already the title itself should give you pause about, okay, what's going on with his brother. And so and I bought the book because it was really sort of, it had made headlines. He was being sort of placed in these sort of spots in the media where he was sort of now sort of seen or being sort of presented as like an expert on black education, even though he was a linguistic scholar. So anyway, he wrote this book, and basically his premise was this: that the reason that black students are underachieving in schools is essentially, what he saw as a cultural reason. And he laid out this sort of three-pronged argument. He said that, black people suffered from what he characterized as a cult of separatism. Well, first of all, he says a cult of victimhood. He said that part of the problem with black people is that we see ourselves as victims. Okay. Right. Yeah, right. And that this perpetual sort of state of seeing ourselves as victims has impeded our ability to sort of progress, particularly in education. He then said that this sort of perpetual state of victimhood resulted in what he called a cult of separatism that results in black people sort of separating ourselves from all things that we think are associated with white people, which would include doing well in school and education. And then from there, he said that this cult of separatism leads to what he calls a cult of anti-intellectualism, which he says is pervasive in black culture. So I read this book and I was mad. I was mad, and there were a lot of black scholars who were mad, and we were like, how dare he? Who is he to say this about our people? And what was particularly frustrating was the fact that he was writing about this not as an informed scholar, even though he was a linguistic scholar, but he was not a scholar of education. He was not a scholar of black psychology. He was not a scholar about the psychology of black students. But what he did was he talked about his experiences teaching at the time at UC Berkeley, and what he sort of observed being the differences between black students and white students and Asian students. And so he built his book primarily on anecdotes with a sprinkling of empirical studies that he cherry picked to try to support his argument. And so anyway, I read this book, was mad. I happened to have data that I had been collecting for a long time that challenged his sort of essential premise. I ended up sort of presenting this at a conference. I think it was called NCORE Conference, a national conference on race in education. I was then asked to sort of submit this to the Harvard Educational Review as a full-fledged study. I did that, and then many years later, it led me to sort of build on that and to write the book, The Myth of Black Anti-Intellectualism: A True Psychology of African American Students. So that's really sort of how the book came into being. It was a response to this individual sort of mischaracterization of black students. And again, given everything that I had gotten from Baba Asa Hilliard in terms of sort of how you defend African people, how do you defend black students, I brought all of that to bear in my sort of response in the book.
And it's really interesting because one of the things, and Bell Hooks talks about this in her work, is one of the things that we know as a function of hegemony and white supremacy really is to be able to get folks that look like the folks that you're talking about and promote ideas that are in service of white supremacy. And it sounds like, I've never read this book, but I mean, it definitely sounds like that, to just kind of take these anecdotes and suggest that, one, that we have a state of perpetual victimhood and that causes us to be separatists and then anti things that we perceive as white, because we know that kind of one of the foundations of kind of people of African descent in this country is this idea of being able to connect with education and intellectualism. So I'm like, okay, so what planet are you on with that kind of?
You're so right, because one of the things that I sort of argued, I think both in my sort of initial paper and then later in the book, is that his essential premise is historically inaccurate. So his part of his premise is that black people and that black culture does not value education. And I'm like, that's simply not true. If we don't value education, why did our ancestors literally shed blood and sacrifice their lives in pursuit of equality? Why did we have people who were willing to get excuse my language, willing to get their asses kicked, willing to have hoses and dogs sort of placed on them as they were sort of fighting for integration and fighting for, and not again integration, that's a whole nother issue. We can I don't want to go to the level because that was not necessarily the greatest thing, but the point is that black people have always fought for quality education for our children. And so the very idea that as a culture that we somehow don't value education, or that we are somehow anti-education or anti-intellectual, goes against history. It's ahistorical. And so and beyond that, it's, and beyond that, it's just, in service of white supremacy to sort of perpetuate that sort of narrative about our people. So yeah, it was all kinds of problematic.
Wow. And okay, I just got to ask one question about that. So I'm always curious of folks like that, whether it be, and I'm just going, you don't have to go with the names, but I'm going to say, because this is my little channel, whether it be someone like Ben Carson, a Condoleezza Rice, who we know is a brilliant scholar. And I mean, they're considered